in the Lord always. Again, I say rejoice. And those words from Scripture set the theme for today's readings. And can you believe that Christmas is 2 weeks from today? I just can't believe that. But today, we have lit the third candle on our fourth candle Advent wreath. The McGrath family came up to do that. Thank you so much. The candles for the first and second week and for the fourth week are all purple. But the candle for this third week of Lent is rose. Rose signifies rejoice, rejoice. The Lord is near. Rose is the color we signify this third week as we rejoice in the coming of the Lord. When the Mass was said in Latin, this third Sunday of Advent was known as Gaudete Sunday. And Gaudete is the Latin word for rejoice. You have to probably be over 60 years old to remember when the Mass was in Latin, but I certainly do. There have been many articles written within the last couple of weeks, of course, on television and radio about Pearl Harbor and the bombing that started our World War II on the 7th in 1941. Because this is the Christmas season, I just have a story I'm dying to tell. And it's a true story about a Chicago priest who was an Army chaplain in World War II, Father John McLaraine. And Father McLaraine's story is detailed in this book written by one of his classmates, Father Ignatius McDermott. Father McLaraine was an Army chaplain with the 361st Infantry in Italy in World War II. And he was there in the winter of 1944, and bitter cold. And we lost a lot of American lives in Italy that year. And on Christmas Eve in Italy in 1944, an American Army patrol was out scouting, and they saw a German patrol coming to them with white flags. So the American patrol put their guns down. The German officers approached them. One of them spoke impeccable English, and he said, "I understand from the prisoners that we've captured that you have a Catholic chaplain in your group." And they said, "Yes. Would he be able to come over to say Mass for us on Christmas Day?" Now remember, the Mass was in Latin, so he didn't have to speak German. Well, they rushed back, got a hold of Father McLaraine. He said, "Great idea, under two conditions." So they checked with the high command, and they said yes. And the two conditions were this. Number one, the Mass would be for both American and German troops at the same time. And the Germans would meet in the middle of the field without their guns, without their ammunition belts. The Americans would meet also without their guns and their ammunition belts, and there would be no fighting on Christmas Day. Christmas Day would be silent. There would be no fighting or war on Christmas Day. So at noon the next day, Father McLaraine was ready. His Jeep was driven out to the middle of a field, and an altar was set up on the back of the Jeep to say Mass. So picture the situation. Assume the Jeep is here, just in the middle of the altar where our communion rail is. And out of the midst of the north, hundreds of German troops started to appear. And they started lining up basically about 10 yards north, where our nave is over here. And hundreds of American troops started coming out of the south, and they lined up on the other side, 10 yards south of the line. Father McLaraine selected a number of German and American officers, and he commissioned them to distribute communion that day. The Mass took over 2 hours, and they gave out more than 3,000 communion hosts. Can you imagine that? The Germans were 20 yards, basically, this side of the altar. The Americans were 10 yards. The Americans were 10 yards the other side of the altar, and I just can't get my hands around that. If you were an American or German soldier, you're looking 20 yards away at somebody who may be trying to kill you the next day. However, there's no question that war is hell, but for one day, the babe in Bethlehem brought peace to warring nations in Italy. I'm just amazed at that. Today's gospel, John came to testify to the light. He was not the light, but he was to testify to the light. And 2,000 years later, this light is still burning brightly, and we need this light more than ever. Be it American, German, Japanese, Muslim, black, white, or Jewish, Jesus is the living God of all. As an aside, Father McLaren returned to Chicago, and in 1960 he was appointed the pastor of St. Emily Parish in Mount Prospect. We bought our first house there in 1962, so we got to know Father McLaren rather well. So in closing on this joyful Gaudete Day Sunday, where do we find joy in the things we do in our lives? The challenge to us is, do we find joy in the wealth that we have accumulated, or do we find joy in the good that we can do for others? Do we find joy in the awards that we've received and great pride, or do we find joy in the help we can give others? Do we find joy in our title, which makes us feel important, or do we find joy in making other people feel important? My mother had a saying, it's nice to be important, but it's more important to be nice. At funeral homilies, I've heard the priest or deacon point to the casket out here in the middle of the altar and say, the world is a better place because the deceased has walked on it. I guess the question and the challenge to us is, when we are out here in our casket at our funeral, will they say, is the world a better place because you or I have walked on it? Remember, Jesus is the reason for the season. Merry Christmas.
Hello, OLPH. My name is Mary Lynn Januszewski, and I'm the Director of Finance and Operations at Our Lady of Perpetual Help Parish in Glenview, Illinois. And this message comes to you with heartfelt gratitude and thanks for your ongoing generosity and support of OLPH Parish. This overwhelming generosity allows us to continue to serve and to minister to the parish community in so many different ways. So thank you, OLPH, for all you do. You are much appreciated.